Okay, so we're starting a new chapter, chapter 10, and this is sort of the companion chapter to chapter 9 that we started talking about last time. Chapter 9 started us on the road to middle childhood, and we talked about physical and cognitive development. This time in chapter 10, we're still talking about middle childhood, those years between 6 and 12, but we're going to focus on social and emotional development. All right, so the first thing section we're gonna focus on is the section part 1, theories of social and emotional development in this time period in middle childhood. Now we do know, as a preface, that these years between 6 and 12 are when our social relationships tend to take on greater importance, particularly with our friends and our peers, and friendships tend to deepen. All right. School begins to expose us to different people, teachers, other parents, other children, and the relationship with the parent who has been pretty much primary caregiver and still is, but primary influence, changes, and we start to develop a greater sense of independence. Now, there's some major theories about how this happens, or how this section of development happens. So we're going to take a look at some of the big ones. The first is psychoanalytic theory. Now, if you remember from psychoanalytic theory, this is where, again, we're talking about Freud. Remember, a lot of Freud's ideas revolved around the unconscious mind. Now, if you think back to Freud's psychosexual stages, the period of time we're talking about now, that age is 6 to 12, that was labeled by Freud as the latency stage. So latency is sort of the time when our sexual feelings remain repressed. They're latent. Not a lot is going on with that. We are focusing instead on intellectual development, academic development, social skills, learning what's valued in our culture, things like that. We're learning about the world around us, and those sexual urges, according to Freud, are repressed. Now, if we look at another psychoanalytic theory, remember Erik Erikson, he is also of this school of thought, a student of Freud. Erikson, remember he talked about the different stages, the psychosocial stages, and here we're really talking about the stage that he labeled industry versus inferiority. This is where we're really learning to be independent, to learn to master skills, to learn to master ideas, to learn to master relationships, and that the mastery of those skills gives us a sense of accomplishment, gives us a sense of competence, gives us a sense that we are able to take care of things. Now, when children don't have an opportunity or fail to master some of these ideas, they may start to have difficulty with peers. They may have to start to have difficulties in school, and as a result, develop a sense of inferiority. Moving on, we have social cognitive theory. And this is basically, we learn a lot about ourselves through our interactions with others. It focuses on the rewards, the reinforcers that we get, and the punishments that we get because of the way we're behaving. And it also focuses on how we learn particular skills from other people. So not only our parents, but we can be influenced by teachers, other adults, our peers, even things, what your book calls symbolic models, things like TV characters or fictional characters, maybe that we read in a book or we see in a game, or see in a video, something like that. So rewards and punishments help us regulate our own behavior, help us learn what is right, what is wrong, what is appropriate and inappropriate, and also the behavior of others is highly influential in this stage of development. Okay, lastly, we can't get out of this chapter without talking about Piaget. And according to Piaget, this middle childhood period coincides with that concrete operational period. Now, there's a table here that we're going to talk about in a minute. This is in your book. And the concrete operational period involves, like, as Piaget said, expanding our worldview beyond just ourselves and beyond just our little circle of life. Okay, this affects our social relationships, so it affects how we see the world. It affects our perspective taking, so our ability to see the world from another person's vantage point, not only literally but also figuratively. Now, to go along with this, Selman back in 1976 developed what he called the levels of perspective taking. And you can see at the different levels, there's 5 different levels, starting at 0 and going up to level 4, which in total is 5. I don't know why you just didn't start at 1, but 0 to 4. And it shows you, at what age each level is and kind of what is happening in terms of being able to take another's perspective and being understand the world through someone else's shoes. So if we look at level 0, that first stage, age 3 to 6. Now this is slightly before this middle childhood period starts. Children are egocentric. They don't realize that people have other perspectives other than their own. Moving on then a little bit later to stage 1, 5 to 9. So at the very beginning of sort of this middle childhood, understand that people in different situations may have different perspectives. Ages 7 to 12, stage 2. Children understand that people think or feel differently because they have different ideas or values. And as understanding this, children are better able to react to how other people act and behave and think and talk. And that's sort of the end, not the end, but sort of gets us more towards the end of this middle childhood. Now, there are going to be some kids who develop even further during middle childhood along these 5 stages. We have stage 3, ages 10 to 15. Child finally realizes both she and another person can consider each other's points of view at the same time. So I can look at my perspective and I can look at your perspective, and we can see those. We can look at those in parallel. Ages 12 and above, so this would be the very end of middle childhood. The child realizes that mutual perspective taking does not always lead to agreement. We can agree to disagree. I can understand and appreciate your perspective, and you can understand and appreciate mine. And we might think the other one is wrong, and we might disagree with that perspective, but we can still understand it. All right? And that's part of this perspective taking is a huge component of this this cognitive development theory stage, this concrete operational idea. All right, something else that we need to consider when we're looking at theories of social and emotional development is this idea of self-concept. Now, our self-concept, if we look at someone who's on the earlier end of this part of life, if we're looking at like the 6-year-olds, let's say, they're very much looking, their self-concept, their ideas about themselves are really focused on concrete things, focused on concrete traits, things like how they look, things that they do, their living situation, their relationships with other people. But as we mature and develop, those traits become much more internalized. We start to think much more abstractly about ourselves. We start to think of in terms of our personality, what we value, how we think of ourselves. That things that may not be necessarily apparent to those who can see us. And your book has some great examples of what this might look like. They have one excerpt from a 9-year-old boy and one excerpt from an 11-year-old girl. Now, the 9-year-old and the 11-year-old were administered what's called the 20 statements test, also known as the Who Am I? And what it is, it's basically just a piece of paper with 20 different questions, and the 20 questions all say, Who am I? And each question, there's a space provided for the person to write about themselves. 20 different traits, values, ideas, thoughts about who you are. And the 9-year-olds, if they looked at this little 9-year-old boy, tended to focus on his physical traits. He had the eye color, where he lived, that he was a boy, what his school was called, who his teacher was, that he liked food. The 11-year-old, the little girl, really starts to talk about more abstract kinds of ideas. I'm a human being. I'm truthful. I'm not pretty. I play tennis. I'm a good musician. I'm ready to be friends with everybody. I'm good. I'm not well liked by my friends. And so we can see that the 9-year-old and the 11-year-old are describing and thinking about themselves very differently. Now, part and parcel of self-concept is our self-esteem. So so not only how we think about ourselves in terms of self-concept, how we would describe ourselves, but self-esteem, and that's basically our self-worth. How do we think of ourselves in terms of worth? Are we worthy? Are we competent? So not just simply descriptors, but more our self-worth. Now, we do know that as childhood carries on, self-esteem tends to decline. And then once we reach adolescence, it starts to rise again. Now, we do see some differences between boys and girls. Girls do tend to have positive self-concepts in things like academics and helping others. Boys tend to see themselves more positively in terms of their math ability, their physical ability, and their physical appearance. Now, it has been demonstrated through some different kinds of research that parenting style can affect self-image. Remember we talked about that authoritarian, authoritative, and the neglectful, rejecting parenting types earlier in the quarter? Well, it's been found that the parents who are authoritarian, where they're involved with their kids, they're interested in their kids, but they do provide clear structure and some restrictions, those are the kids that tend to have the best self-image. Kids with low self-esteem tend to have parents who are either authoritarian, super, super strict, unyielding, ungiving, or the rejecting, neglecting parents, the two extremes of sort of the parenting styles. The parents that have the style that's more in the middle ground tend to have kids that have the best self-esteem. Now, we do know that social acceptance by our peers is a huge plays a huge role in self-esteem, and that social acceptance is related to self-esteem and highly influential in self-esteem and self-image. So what our peers think of us matters. All right, and last but not least, something that can develop during this period, particularly for those who have low self-esteem, is this concept of learned helplessness. Kind of relates back to that industry versus inferiority idea that Erickson was getting to. This is a belief that we're not able to obtain the rewards that we seek because we're just not able. We're not capable. And helpless children who have learned this tend to quit when they fail. They tend to believe that success is more due to ability than to effort. So no matter how much time they put into it, if they don't have the ability, it's not going to happen. They also tend to have lower grades, lower IQs, and lower achievement test scores. These kids who seem to have learned that no matter what they do, it doesn't matter. Now, regardless of ability, we do seem to see a gender difference. That girls, even if they're just as confident as boys, still see themselves as less confident and less competent in math, even when they're achieving at the very same level as boys.